Okay. Huh. I I don't know why the toolbar went away. Okay. My name is Ryan Raymond, and this is my presentation on Chapter 5 of Machine Learning and Security. The chapter opens with a very clear and I think like a very telling claim about like what in terms of cybersecurity, there's a lot of focus on things like malware detection or monitoring processes within the computer. But the book makes it clear that the most likely way that attackers will gain entry into our infrastructure is through the network. Even though out of band attacks, people breaking into your facilities, it might seem like scary. The fact is that roads bring the world to your door. And when you connect your computer to the internet, when you connect it to a network, you bring the whole world to your door. So let's talk about how those networks do that. Now, a lot of people talk about the 7-layer OSI model. I think it's pointlessly complicated, but it's worse than pointlessly complicated. It's impractical, especially for younger students. I think the TCP/IP 4-layer stack is a lot more telling because it's very grounded in reality. It's composed of these 4 layers, each of which corresponds to something concrete that people deal with that software engineers might deal with on a daily basis. So explaining these layers in abstract terms is kind of an impossible task, but I like to look at them in terms of an analogy. So imagine that you're reading a book, because what is a website if not a book? Now, this book is being transmitted over the network or over the mail system, and so you're receiving you're receiving the book one page at a time. So imagine that you have a secretary who makes sure that all of these pages arrive in order and in order and without any missing. That is what TCP performs. It splits up your data into little packs that can be sent across the network efficiently in a packet switching methodology. And it appears to you like a faucet. You put something in one end, it comes out the other. It's very simple. But the secretary is actually performing a lot of work behind the scenes. You can think of IP as like mail because it's like an envelope that wraps around data and allows it to be independently addressed, routed, and buffered. Like that's a big deal. It's your data gets split up. It gets split up and then it can be sent across different routes. You don't have to have like a circuit open. You might have heard of circuit switching. So in that way, IPv4 actually performs something extremely important because it lets you have thousands of letters all packaged up in a single bin. And then finally, Ethernet, which is what we think of as the layer 1 Ethernet. It's like a truck that carries packages from point A to point B. It doesn't know what the packets are for. It doesn't know where they intend to go. It just carries them across a physical medium. So that's the 4-layer network stack in a nutshell. And I think it's a lot easier to understand than the 7-layer network. One thing that my students always get confused about is the difference between an IP address and a port number. And so I'm going to take a bit of creative liberty here, and I'm going to simplify things a lot. But I'll say the IP address specifies which computer the packet should go to, and the port number is actually used within that computer, and all it specifies is which program will receive the packet. That's nice and cut and dry. I know that it's not that simple in reality, but it's very close, and I think it captures the nutshell. So let's talk about how people actually perform attacks over the network. According to National Institute of Standards and Technology, the CIA triad is basically the cornerstone of information security. And the idea is data should be confidential. You have to maintain its integrity, and it should always be available in a timely manner to people who need it. And that's basically everything you're trying to maintain. And when you have a something like a and then if you want to generalize this a little bit, you can think not in terms of data, but in terms of control. So control should be confidential. Only people with the proper rights should have control over your system. People shouldn't be able to damage your system and take it down, and they shouldn't be able to use it for purposes that you don't want them to. So whether it's information or control, it's the same thing. It's CIA. Just a couple forms of network attack. The most basic one is a denial of service attack. So the idea is if you can use up a resource, it basically blocks people from being able to use that resource. And so, for example, this gentleman is performing a denial of service attack on subway seats by using up many subway seats, and he's being very efficient about this. So uh, that's a simple denial of service attack. It actually gets a bit more complicated than that, because you can imagine if you had to imagine you're trying to perform a denial of service attack on a pizzeria, and so you're basically just buying every pizza and eating it yourself. Well, that's expensive, that's wasteful, that's slow. A more efficient way to do this is to order pizzas to other people's houses, because then you don't have to you don't have to eat the pizzas, you don't have to store the pizzas. The idea is a denial of service attack is about more than just using resources. It's about finding ways to waste them. You can take advantage of the way that programs were written and find interesting ways of wasting an inordinate amount of resources with minimal effort on your part. It's all about wastage. And then, so when people are trying to waste many resources, many hands makes for light work. And that's where distributed denial of service comes in. The idea, if you can imagine, go back to our pizzeria analogy. If you place a bunch of fraudulent orders for pizza, eventually your number is going to get blocked. And if you perform a denial of service attack on any enterprise network, they're going to block you. Actually, your ISP might block you. And so one effective way to scale your attack is to use an army of zombies. If you had infinite zombies with infinite phone numbers, they could DDoS a pizzeria because nobody would be available to take phone calls because they'd all be dealing with the barrage of phone calls from the zombies. And how are you supposed to know who's a legitimate call? And what, DDoS attacks come hand in hand with botnets. Now, back in the day, people might have used ransomware to extract money from people, or they might have just, displayed ads in the user's face. And these things are very obvious. If you have a computer that's infected with ransomware, you're going to find out sooner or later. But that's not really how it works anymore. So these days, something much more lucrative is to actually enslave people's computers into botnets. And these botnets are like an army of droids that you can actually rent out. It's like having an army of robot mercenaries. And it's hard to get hard numbers on this, but it looks like about 25% of computer connected devices are part of botnets. These are some of the more of the studies that I have seen have suggested that. And then another form of attack is a probing attack. This one, if you're a kid who gets like a box of Legos for Christmas and you can't actually look inside the box, you might want to guess well, let's say you didn't know it was Legos. You might want to guess what's in the Christmas present. So you might shake it and you're using it. When you shake a box, you're performing a stochastic process where you're just randomly adding entropy to the system to see how it reacts. And you could also say if you want to know something about an animal in a cage, you should poke it and see what it does. Fuzzing is exactly like that. You perform operations, many different operations in a somewhat of a random fashion to try to observe the reaction of the system. And this is one of the easiest things to detect because I guess for various reasons that are out of scope, it's easier to detect fuzzing than it is to detect a DDoS attack. Its fuzzing looks something like this. So imagine if you're looking for the admin panel on a website, you might just get a word list with infinite something.php words that are generally associated with admin panels on websites, and you might just form thousands of GET requests on the websites until you identify the admin panel. So this is what we call a fuzzing attack. And if you look through the logs, you can sometimes see, I mean, I have seen people fuzz my servers, and they'll just go through a list of like words like this, trying to find your admin panel. Those are the basic kinds of attacks that people can perform on your network. So the question is, how can we defend against these attacks? Well, let's so in the book, they used a particular data set called NSL-KDD, which is based on KDD Cup 99, and it's a subset of that. So we'll just refer to KDD Cup 99. We'll refer to them interchangeably. And this is basically divided into 4 kinds of attacks. There are 2 other kinds of attacks that we have already discussed, which is to say attacks that perform denial of service and attacks that are simply probing or fuzzing. And it also contains 2 attacks that personally I don't consider a network attack. And these are simply people trying to access services. And the way that I know that this is not network based is if you actually look at the features. Some of these features are not they're not accessible over the network. They're not network related. They're like, for one, they're wrapped in a secure shell session, or they would be in the future. Anyway, these are captured packets. You can see these are captured TCP packets. One thing you might notice is that they come from a range of source ports, source addresses. This is an example from the real world of a DDoS attack. And you can't just feed this directly into a model. I mean, what are you going to feed it, a PCAP file? So what we have to perform is feature extraction. So here are some of the interesting features that we can grab out of this that we can grab out of this PCAP file. We can grab the port numbers. We can get the timestamps, and this timestamp would be something like we'd normalize it. We would scale it using something like a normal scaler or a min-max scaler so that it's on like a range between 0 and 1. We've got protocols. These are qualitative labels. The length of the packet would scale that. And sometimes, but not always, we have the packet contents. And these packet contents, you might perform some other feature extraction on the packet contents. You might look for known troublesome words, like you might say, does the packet contain the word SSH? That's suspicious. It's just one example. And the other one is IP addresses. You would usually use a label encoder to convert each unique IP address into an integer ID. Something else you could do if you were able to reconstruct the TCP session is you could find out how long the session was, or how many packets or how many bytes traveled through the session, or you could reconstruct the data stream. And eventually you would end up with a packet like this. And so the reason I say, now that might be destination port, or it could be an integer ID encoding of like the destination address. It doesn't much matter. This is from the NS. This is from this CICS-IDS 2017 data set. And this is already, but these features have already all been extracted for us. And so we can see what we actually kind of feed into the model. Now, if you look at this data, you might not believe that we can actually do anything useful with this data. We can. So I found an interesting paper which did an in-depth analysis of the CICIDS 2017 data set, and they found something very interesting. So they were extremely they were extremely performant. Not only were they very accurate, they also had high precision, and very low false positive rate, and so they didn't miss anomalies. And that's interesting. That'll come up later when I talk about the NSL-KDD dataset. So this is the example that the book actually uses, is the KDD cup dataset. And as you can see, it looks very similar to the CICIDS 2017 dataset. It's just CSE, comma separated values. It's interesting because it contains a lot of useful features, network features, like how long the session was, what the protocol was, and TCP flags and stuff like that, but it also contains information that you can't capture over the network, like how many files were created on a computer and how many files were accessed. Now, this is not the kind of thing that's impossible to find. You would just need cooperation with the systems would need to cooperate and divulge this data. And it's interesting because the goal of the project, and this is something that people talked about in the papers, was a little bit muddy because the project actually had well, I'll show you. So here are the attack types for the project, and you can see that it's mostly normal traffic, and there's a little bit of Neptune attack, whatever that is, but it's a bit easier to understand when you look at the actual categories. You've got benign traffic, just denial of service, you've got probes, and then you have tiny, tiny, tiny little remote to local, which is to say, trying to get a shell on the machine from the network, and user to root, which is privilege escalation, right? So this is the train data, but here's something interesting, right? There is no user to root in the train data and almost no root to remote to local. But look at the test data. There's so much root to remote to local, and there's also user to root. People talked about this. There's stuff in the testing data that's just not in the train data. And so I'm assuming that they expected you to perform some sort of anomaly detection. But here's something interesting, right? Here's something interesting. Look at the book. So the book actually had us train a model. They used a random forest which is an ensemble, combined with k-means, and they used a type of clustering that actually was not able to find information about on the internet. But what they found was they were very accurate at predicting benign traffic. But when it came to detecting anomalous traffic, they actually were not very performant. And I believe this is because R2L and U2R were both absent from the training data, which I think is pretty cool because if you don't train on data that's similar to your testing conditions, you're going to get poor performance. But still, it is interesting to see that we are able to determine, especially DDoS information. I should say, session duration was extremely important for detecting denial of service attacks. We were able to, using the number of bytes and the session duration alone, we were able to get like very high accuracy at detecting denial of service attacks, which is pretty interesting because it kind of shows that there is not even hidden. It just shows there was information that kind of underpins how these attacks work. They're not like random. So we learned about how networks really work, and we learned about how network attacks work. We learned about how we extract features from PCAP captured packet files and use them to generate data sets. And we also demonstrated that these data sets are not like mysterious. It's fairly trivial to create a model that can accurately classify sessions and packets if you include all the attack types, all the labels in the training set, and don't leave them out like the KDD Cup guys did.